Welcome to our 6th and final review of Vampire Academy, aka Last Sacrifice.
It's our last sacrifice, am I right?
Except for the fact that even though this series is very cheesy, it is weirdly enjoyable.
Definitely, and I can't get over the fact that we actually reviewed 6 whole books in this series.
Who even are we?
I don't know.
Last Sacrifice begins right where the last book left off, and Rose is in jail for the murder of Queen Tatiana without a clue of who did it. Lucky for her, she has a lot of good friends on her side, and they bust her out of jail in a grand fashion.
There are explosions, chaos, stealing cars, mass panic. It's not subtle, but it's effective.
Lissa is left behind to play detective at court, while Rose, Sydney, and Dimitri are shipped off to the middle of nowhere to wait for her friends to clear her name. But Rose is not one to sit still.
Because Rose has discovered that Lissa has a secret sibling, and she's determined to find them. That way, Lissa will have her vote on the council. Rose also gets this brilliant idea that Lissa should submit herself as a candidate for queen.
Lissa can't actually become queen because she is the last of her line unless Rose could find the mystery sibling, but having Lissa participate in the monarchy process will help stall the process long enough that Rose and her friends can find out who murdered Tatiana and why.
So this book has 2 perspectives. One is Rose looking in on Lissa's mind as she goes through her trial and tries to figure out who the murderer is, and the other is Rose as she hides from the Popo and follows the trail for the mystery sibling.
And of course, finding the mystery sibling isn't easy, so she's forced to team up with some old enemies and find some old friends. Last Sacrifice goes to some weird places. It wraps up some loose ends, but it also creates new strings that don't get tied up.
Rose ends up at some weird caves where there are some Morai who are living by the old ways. That was interesting, but it also left more questions than answers for me.
These Morai live in concert with humans and Dhampir, and they train Morai to fight. They were actually pretty fascinating because they offered a foil to the court that they left behind. The way they were set up in the story, I thought they would have more bearing on the plot.
But I actually think they were just an interesting solution to a plot problem that Mead had come up with, and then they were accidentally too interesting.
I was sad that we left them so quickly.
The Old World Morai Society was one of the biggest loose ends that didn't get tied up, but it's not a huge detriment to the series or anything. Mead does a good job of tying up other loose ends, like Victor and Robert Doru and Sonia Karp. And, speaking of loose ends, this wouldn't be a Vampire Academy novel if there wasn't some serious would they won't they Rose and Dimitri shit going on, because one more for the road, right?
Sweet.
Dimitri swore to Rose that he was incapable of love after being a Strigoi, and Rose was on her way to accepting that. But when he helped bust her out of jail, and now all of a sudden he's been woken out of his funk and he's realized, hey, oh yeah, maybe I do feel exactly the same way that I felt about you before.
And Rose is like, sign me up!
And that's not a spoiler because no one was surprised.
Except for poor Adrian. Like, my god, she should have been honest with him ages ago. Every time Rose and Adrian have been together in this series, it has been like watching the world's slowest train wreck. I am glad that it finally happened so that he can move on with his life.
I mean, Rose and Dimitri are kind of cute, but I'm still not over the fact that he used to be her teacher.
Also, for some reason, it finally sunk in this, the 6th and final book, that Dimitri is supposed to be 6'7". So like, yeah, no wonder he's such a good fighter. He could just reach over with his pool noodle arms and just slap you silly.
He can't fit through doorways. Doorways are his enemy. A Strigoi just needs to run through a series of normal doorways, and he will eventually just knock himself out on one of the door frames.
He's lucky he can catch a Strigoi at all, with the constant cloud cover that's probably just orbiting his head.
But whatever, Rose and Dimitri finally are together. This series is over, and there will be no more will they, won't they. Thank God. Last Sacrifice felt a little disjointed plot-wise. There are the 2 problems that need to be solved. 1, Lissa's sibling, and 2, the murderer mystery. And the murderer plot seems a little bit more slapdash out of the 2.
Which seems unlikely, but here we are. The answers to the mystery is kind of a letdown. In that, number 1, it seems a little out of character for the murderer, and 2, it felt like there were really never any clues to the murder plot.
It just felt like they discovered that it wasn't a love-related crime, and that eliminated a suspect, and then bam! They had their murderer.
It was really anticlimactic, and somehow I still guessed the murderer, even though the clues made no sense, simply based on the characters that were randomly hanging out in the novel.
So yeah, the murder mystery plot was a bit of a letdown in this novel.
And the hunt for Lissa's sibling was more interesting because it takes us on some good adventures, but also when it was revealed who Lissa's sibling was, after 6 books I can't really remember anything significant about them. Do they actually do anything in this series?
I'm kind of interested in how long Richelle Mead was setting the sibling thing up. Was this character introduced way back in the series for this exact moment, or was it a convenience thing? Not interested enough to go back and reread 6 books, but if you know, does anyone have any answers? But that's it. That's all we have to say about this book. Overall, Last Sacrifice was a decent ending to a 6-book series. Predictable, a little bit slow to get into, but it felt like the rest of the books in the series, and it wrapped everything up pretty well.
Vampire Academy has been fairly consistent with its series. There have been some great surprise moments, some cringeworthy moments, but overall it was fairly well written, and it was a lighthearted romp that was at least memorable when it wasn't good.
It was better than I expected it to be, and I'm proud of us. We got to that ending.
I know, and it's been 6 years of us reading this series. Don't
you dare.
I don't want it to end.
Back fell creature.
There's a whole second series about Lissa's sibling.
I swear to God.
6 more years!
I did my time in Azkaban.
Woo!